finding compassion for yourself and your scapegoat parent after narcissistic abuse. Have you realized that one of your parents was scapegoated by the other? Do you want to relate to your scapegoated parent with appreciation instead of contempt? And do you also want to live without the presence of scapegoats or superior people? Today's video is the second in a two-part series on recovery from parental alienation. I focus on the child who had one of their parents scapegoated by the other. Recovery involves finding it safe to question long-held views towards both parents. Survivors had to believe that the other parent deserved the narcissistic parent's cruelty. The narcissistic parent would typically threaten abandonment or attack otherwise. Safety can happen in relationships that allow one to think their own thoughts without such threats. I described 3 steps in the recovery process: deprogramming, surrendering ownership of your attitudes towards the scapegoat parent, and healing your moral injury. I'll use an anonymized case example to illustrate throughout. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in recovery from narcissistic abuse. Both in my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to the process of recovery. And this has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 is making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance from narcissistic abusers and closeness with safe people. Pillar number 3 is living in defiance of the narcissist rules. It's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. I've both seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. And today's video falls under pillar number 3, living in defiance of the narcissist rules. Well, if you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or a partner, then I encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as the Scapegoat, and it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoat child or partner of the narcissistic abuser. From self-limiting beliefs about yourself that you must adopt in order to survive, to why the narcissistic personality is so geared to put those closest to them down. I think this ebook can help you realize how none of this abuse was your fault, but rather the product of the narcissist's psychological and emotional problems. You can find the link to the book in the description box below or by clicking here. The process of recovery, knowing it is safe to be wrong about the scapegoat parent. The secret wish of children with a scapegoat parent is that they can be wrong about that parent. In a variety of ways, the narcissistic parent made the child see them as the only viable parent. Next, they insisted the child despise the scapegoat parent for them to bond with that child. To feel attached, the child had to sacrifice their relationship to their own reality, to the scapegoat parent, and essentially to themselves. The child has had to insist to themselves that the narcissistic parent is right about the scapegoat parent, yet their freedom and healing lies in knowing that they and their narcissistic parent were wrong about that other parent all along. So the very thing that would have left the child with no viable parent to attach to earlier in life is exactly what can set them free today. Well, let's look at another anonymized case example. Derek had been in therapy for many years in his adult life. He was aware of how his narcissistic mother treated him as a scapegoat. He was less aware at this point of how she had previously scapegoated his father. Derek's father separated from his mother when Derek was 12 years old. Prior to that, she would explode into rages at his father on a near nightly basis. She lamented how he did not communicate with her, how he did not care about her, and how he was so selfish. Derek's father was a softer spoken man who did not know how to respond to his volatile wife. He would remain quiet as she raged, and when he did respond, she would grow even more furious. Derek remembered being captivated by these nightly screaming bouts from his mother. She was the boss of the house. All the decisions went through her. Derek felt like his mother was generally positive towards him, although she could explode at him at times too. For his sake, Derek looked up to his father, who was an accomplished military man, very intelligent, and handy around the house, along with being a really good athlete. Derek would always look to spend as much time with his father as he could. He was put into a state of severe conflict as he listened to his mother rail against his father. Was his mother just a mean person? Something in him really did not want to believe this. Was his father as bad as she was claiming? That's not what his experience told him, but his mother seemed so convinced. Something in him felt it might be easier to believe this. When Derek's father finally decided to separate from his mother, Derek now had a reason to see his father the way his mother did. He echoed his mother's sentiments that his father was leaving the family, not just their marriage. The fact that his father showed up faithfully to every planned visit couldn't dent Derek's resentment towards him. Derek fell squarely into line with his mother's attitude of contempt and devaluation towards his father for what felt like just cause at the time. His father's supposed abandonment proved that he was as bad as his mother had always claimed. What does the child survivor need to safely be wrong about the scapegoat parent? A new relationship that feels solid, ongoing, and accepting is required to recover. The child survivor needs to have someone in their lives who is unconditional in their support, that they get to be free to care about whomever they care about, and it poses no threat to this relationship. The survivor needs this kind of relationship as a foundation from which to question their antipathy towards the scapegoat parent. The survivor must create psychological and emotional distance from the narcissistic parent's influence. This aligns with the second pillar of recovery. Distance allows the survivor to absorb what is offered in the new safe relationship. If the narcissistic parent stays influential, then the pressure to be in opposition to the scapegoat parent can remain. Let's go back to Derek. Ever since his parents separated, Derek felt a seething anger, even hatred, towards his father. As an adult, when his father would visit him, Derek would be seized with a visceral hostility towards him. In therapy, Derek described a sense of almost being possessed. He said, "It's like in my head, I'm looking forward to see him, but when he shows up at my door, I'm gripped with an anger that I just can't shake. No matter what he says or does, it's not right." Derek's therapist was male and they had a good relationship. His therapist would remain neutral a lot of the time to let Derek work through his thoughts and impressions. As this relationship felt secure, it allowed Derek a foundation from which to question his attitude towards his father. One day, Derek was hanging out with his friends and they were talking about a timeshare vacation rental they had taken. Well, Derek felt a sudden pang of sadness, tenderness, and warmth as he recalled his father once offered to get a timeshare rental for them to take a vacation. Instead of dismissing this feeling as he might usually, Derek paid attention to it. He saw his father in a much more loving light in that moment. He also felt tremendous grief at having had to deny these feelings towards his father for so long. At his next therapy session, Derek brought this experience up. He and his therapist explored, and Derek began to question his long-held hostile opinions about his father. He had learned from his mother, mostly indirectly, that his father was emotionally unavailable, dangerous, and selfish. The experience with the timeshare and the memory related to his father's desire to spend time with Derek managed to break through his mother's lessons. Derek had started down the path of now being able to see his father without the distortions his mother had made necessary. Steps in the recovery process. Deprogramming. The child of a scapegoated parent has to deprogram what they've been told to believe. In essence, that what they thought was bad was actually good, and that what they thought was good was actually bad. There's a line from a rap song in the 1980s called Peter Piper by Run DMC that goes, it's just an excerpt from the song. It goes, "He's the big bad wolf in your neighborhood, not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good." The narcissistic parent tells their child that the scapegoat parent is the big bad wolf. The implication is that if the scapegoat parent is so bad and dangerous, then the narcissistic parent is proportionately good and safe. The process of deprogramming puts this lyric into action in the survivor's life. The survivor swaps out what bad means to see that just because a creature is a wolf does not mean that they are dangerous. Well, you might work on being mindful of reactions to the scapegoated parent, catching the thoughts and attitudes that arise towards them. Next, you can gently remind yourself that they are not who they seem in this way. Each time you can do this, a sliver of light, I think, gets to enter the darkness that has had to shroud one's love for the scapegoated parent. The survivor is aligning themselves back to the truth of who they are. The child who had to disavow the scapegoat parent also had to disavow the part of themselves that identifies with that parent. So every expression of contempt towards the scapegoat parent is an act of contempt towards oneself. Deprogramming from hostile attitudes towards the scapegoat parent moves the survivor closer to feeling love for that parent and for themselves. Surrendering ownership of your attitudes and thoughts. The child of a scapegoat parent has had their own thoughts and attitudes hijacked. This experience is not common in life and can be very difficult to accept. For our mental and emotional stability, we have to assume that we own our thoughts and feelings. To be aware that our private thoughts have been dominated by the purposes of someone else can be very disturbing. The child of the narcissistic parent has to use everything at their disposal to maintain that parent's attachment to them. This includes the integrity of their own perceptions and beliefs. Their private thoughts and attitudes become a means towards the end of keeping the bond with the narcissistic parent intact. So if holding contemptuous thoughts towards the scapegoat parent keeps the narcissistic parent satisfied, then so be it. The child survivor grows familiar with such negative reactions to their scapegoat parent, and these thoughts may have been around in their mind for many years. It's destabilizing to consider that such thoughts were never one's own, that they are and were the product of the narcissistic parent's manipulation. This means that their perception of reality, where this parent is the bad one, has been wrong all along. Although there is a promise of freedom and healing in this wrongness, it can initially be very scary. Well, within the context of an ongoing safe relationship, the survivor can surrender ownership of these thoughts today. It requires, I think, the security of such a relationship to do so. This part of the recovery process involves considering that you do not know your scapegoat parent or yourself as well as you may have thought you did, that the thoughts and attitudes you've held towards them for so long were implanted by the narcissistic parent. You also may recognize that your psychological sanctity was in fact violated by the narcissistic parent. It's crucial to feel connected to and grounded in a good ongoing relationship to be able to go through such change. Therapy can offer this kind of support. Healing the child survivor's moral injury. The child who is forced to participate in the narcissistic parent's scapegoating of the other parent may feel like a bad person for participating in this. The child usually has no one to help with the guilt and shame that they may feel over having to be cruel to an otherwise decent person. As a result, they can harbor a deep feeling of badness that may go unchallenged for years. There's a term for this called moral injury. A moral injury happens when we are forced to act in ways that conflict with our moral beliefs. So a child who believes that they are a loving person can experience a moral injury if their narcissistic parent pressures them to hate their other parent. If that other parent has seemed good, but the child loathes them, then how can the child still think of themselves as a loving person? The child's conclusion that they are not, therefore, a loving person is the moral injury in this example. Well, this concept is similar to how child soldiers are often inducted into service by being forced to murder an innocent person. Now the child feels like they are at a crossroads. They can either go on being a murderer, as they have just supposedly shown themselves to be, or they can try to live as a loving person who has just had to murder someone. The latter can only be concluded with enough relational safety, and such safety is typically absent in the lives of child soldiers in this case, and in the other case, in the children of scapegoated parents. It also serves the narcissistic parent's interest for the child to feel morally injured. Since the child sees themselves, often unconsciously, as cruel, then they have less grounds to object to the narcissistic parent's treatment of the other parent. The child reasons that their narcissistic parent is not doing anything to the parent that the child is not already doing also. So the child's moral compass becomes distorted and they can feel like a corrupted person inside. Well, moral injuries can be healed in the context of a new, safe, and ongoing relationship. Compassion was missing in the circumstances that produced the moral injury. The narcissistic parent showed no compassion towards the other parent. The child was coerced to deny their own compassion towards this parent also. All the while, no compassion was shown the child for what a terrible position they were being put in. A survivor who is in therapy, for instance, can experience the therapist's compassion for the impossible situation that they faced. As they deprogram the negative thoughts about the scapegoat parent, they can also feel compassion towards this parent. And over time, the survivor can feel less shame over what they were forced to participate in. Talking about these feelings and being met with compassion can be a very powerful antidote to shame. Well, let's return to Derek. He had built on the momentum he experienced in this memory of his father's loving stance towards him. He was able to catch his automatic negative thoughts about his father and begin to question them with his therapist. He did this in therapy sessions and on his own. He was deprogramming the hostility that his narcissistic mother insisted he hold towards his father. Derek called his father and talked with him without being seized by hostility this time. He regarded his father as a person who deserved his respect. They spoke on a weekly basis, and Derek experienced his father as an ally for the first time since his childhood. Therapy gave Derek a place where he could relinquish ownership of the negative feelings towards his father without feeling too destabilized. He said, "It's amazing to me how thoroughly I have had to believe in my father's badness. These thoughts really seem like my own when they come to me. I'll think of my dad, and a memory of how he supposedly disappointed me will immediately spring up. But when I look closer at that memory, it's not nearly as damning of him as I thought it was." Derek was in an important stage of growth in this recovery by letting go of the ways he had known his father and himself all these years. As Derek got used to his new reality where he could feel love for his father, he also discovered a lot more love for himself. He realized how the hatred he had been forced to feel towards his father resulted in him feeling hatred towards himself as well. The parts of Derek that were similar to his father had always seemed like they had no value. Now Derek could see and appreciate his own intelligence, athleticism, and even began to take on DIY projects around his home. A few months later, Derek shared in therapy how he had felt like such a bad person throughout his life, but never knew why. And that he knew now that hating his father when his parents separated made him feel like Derek himself was bad. How could he be so mean to someone who was loving towards him? Well, Derek's therapist asked him what he thought his motivation to hate his father was at the time. Derek said, "Well, I thought I had to protect my mother. She seemed so wounded by their separation. When I would think of her feeling rejected by him, I would grow enraged. I guess it seemed like the right thing to do to hate him." His therapist said, "I bet it did. You see now how your mother manipulated you to feel this way, but what 12-year-old kid could see through such tactics?" Tears welled up in Derek's eyes as he felt a surge of relief run through him. It wasn't just my dad who was wronged here. It was me too. Well, this began the healing of the moral injury that Derek had suffered. Well, I hope you found today's video and last week's video helpful if you are in the process of recovering from having had a parent who was scapegoated. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for your continued participation and support of this channel. It means a tremendous amount to me, and it's just awesome every week again to see the support offered one another and the kind of validation that folks get to know for themselves and experience from other commenters who sort of validate and support each other's experience. So yeah, it's just incredibly rewarding to see that each week. And I want to thank everyone for that. And so with that, I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.